Hi. I can now, for the first time, definitively say that I have seen every single episode of the 1991 version of Land of the Lost, because I did have some memory of Misery Loves Company. In fact, I had a lot of memories of Misery Loves Company. A lot of it was familiar, but the sorcerer, not the Sorceress's Apprentice, I had zero memory of. And it's possible that when I first saw the first appearance of Keela, I forget what that episode was called. I can look it up though. The Sorceress, and it didn't seem familiar until the one-eyed dinosaur monster. But Sorceress's Apprentice, nothing seemed familiar as I was watching it, and I would have remembered as I will get to. So that's it's a nice feeling. It's not one of my major goals, but it's something that, like the last time that I did this without talking about it on YouTube, I kind of fell off before I reached the last 2 to 4 episodes, and uh, and part of that was they were familiar to me from the titles, but Sorcerer's Apprentice never was. So I'll get to that. First, though, I wrote down the titles of. Remember, you know, in season 2, the end credits play over commercials and advertising for other ABC programs, and I finally wrote them down. Cowboys of Moo Mesa, which I don't know anything about, and Life Goes On is another show. And then at the end of Misery Loves Company, which is the very last episode of this version of Land of the Lost, um, there was an ad for the world premiere of the Mary Kate and Ashley movie, possibly. To Grandmother's House We Go, and it aired on December 5th, so that makes sense. Um, so yeah, I'm just going to look at one more thing. Bullets and Butterflies is a cassette tape that um, what's his name, Kevin has, that Tasha destroys at the beginning of Misery Loves Company. And so I was just looking to see. Bullet with Butterfly Wings is a Smashing Pumpkins song. That's not it. Bullets and Butterflies is a 2008 movie, which definitely wouldn't have been the what he's talking about. And uh, Bullets and Butterflies by Adurn is a song from 2013. So I'm going to go with no. It's just another one of those things like the what was it, the Thunder Twins or something like that. Thunder Force is the recent Netflix movie with Melissa McCarthy and Ma Octavia Spencer. But in any case, so I wrote all of those down, and I had meant to look up Bullets and Butterflies, but that seems to be just another album that he made up. There are a couple more in these 2 episodes that I wrote down. Why do they have that? How did they get that? But I'll just go from the beginning. Um, so I wasn't sure that Keela was actually going to be in this episode because the first appearance of the Sorceress is actually just as a bright light that Annie sits up in bed in the middle of the night, and she's looking at the bright light and she's talking to it. And so I thought, oh, did they not want to pay the actor to come back? But she does show up at the end. Keela does. Um, and let's see. And, it opens with Tasha getting a midnight snack, walking around the treehouse, which is in many ways a tent. It's a campsite. And they always have the nice nighttime jungle noises um, when they have night scenes, and because they don't have glass on the window, so all the sound comes right in. So that's nice. That always reminds me of summers in Michigan. And so Annie's talking to the light, and suddenly a giant book, appears in her lap, and she says that she's been instructed to guard it until Keela returns from a dangerous mission. And she's been given strict instructions to not open it. So, of course, the first thing that happens is that Kevin tries to take the book from her and open it, and Tom comes to Annie's assistance and say, "Don't open it." And then in the morning, Kevin tries to enlist Stink to distract Annie, which he does by popping upside down from their roof through her window, and saying hi, Annie Porter, in his way. And then he explains that Kevin has asked him to distract her while he steals the book. So a lot of that, and Annie decides to hide the book. And the way that she does it is, well, she opens it and she learns a couple of spells. And first thing she does is she creates a flower, but it doesn't stick around. And then Scarface attacks, and she seems to curse him with burping, which is something that would happen in Harry Potter. Like one of the kids would curse the other with a burping jinx or something like that, but she does it to Scarface. And so he stomps away burping, which gets the Sleestack's attention. And then they find her when she finally decides to hide it in a tree stump. She uses a spell to create a door in the tree stump. They hear her say the spell, and then she hides it in the tree stump. She goes away. They use the same spell to steal it. So apparently anybody who says the words that are in the book can do what the spells purport to do, which seems a bit too democratic for magic. But oh, and here's something. And again, this was 1992, before Jurassic Park came out, and they would have done it because as stop motion, they would have done it months earlier, if not a year earlier. They have a scene where there's a Brontosaurus looking at Stink and Kevin. I think it's Stink. Yes, Stink and Kevin are at the treehouse, so looking out over the front plot, and there's a Brontosaurus there. I think the Brontosaurus has a name, but I forget. I know the Stegosaurus has a name now, Spike. And the Brontosaurus sneezes on Kevin and Stink, blowing them back into the treehouse through the door. And in Jurassic Park, almost the exact same thing happens. There's a Brachiosaurus, and I think that science has determined that all apatosaurs are the same dinosaur or something. I don't know. But either Brachiosauruses or Brontosauruses have been absorbed into another kind of dinosaur. Probably Apatosauruses and Brontosauruses became this. I don't know. But look it up. Dinosaurs are interesting. And Brontosauruses are some of my favorites. But anyway, it's a Brachiosaurus because it has a hump on its head in the Jurassic Park movie. And Alan Grant and Lex and Tim are in a tree, not a tree house, but they've climbed up into a tree to sleep safely, and there's a Brachiosaurus. There are a bunch of them at night, and then in the morning, one of them's gotten very close to eat the leaves of the tree right up where they are, and they break off a branch and offer it, and they get it to come closer so that they can reach out and pet it. And Lex, who is very hesitant to touch the dinosaur, she starts reaching out, and then it kind of pulls back and sneezes on her, gets mucus all over her. There was no mucus this time, so in Land of the Lost, it just blew them backwards, the power of the sneeze. In Jurassic Park, it didn't blow them backwards, but mucus. And I'm not saying that Jurassic Park took it from Land of the Lost, but this is the sort of thing, and there was another, I forget exactly what it was, I think it was a T-Rex chasing the truck, where one would assume that the TV show with a small budget and stop-motion dinosaurs stole the shots from the big-budget blockbuster, one of the greatest movies ever made. But it was a year before, and so they did it on their own, and it's a neat thing. So let's see. So throughout going on with the action of the episode, Kevin becomes confrontational when Annie returns without the book, and she magics him, which causes things like inanimate objects like his hat and I think a rake to start moving on their own, which is a reference, I think, to the Sorcerer's Apprentice from Fantasia and all the marching brooms. But then, like I said, the Sleestacks manage to steal it with the magic. They bring it to Shung, who is only a little annoyed that they didn't bring him meat, but he starts to learn magic. Now he can do magic, and he could already do magic because he had the crystals, and he had some kind of psychic thing going on. Later on, the Sleestacks capture Tom, and I guess he left earlier in the episode for some reason, and they bring him to Shung to eat. He turns Tom into a turtle. So now Annie goes to rescue him, and there's a magic duel between Annie and Shung, and Annie ultimately manages to use more powerful magic, um, restricting the movement of Shung long enough for her to go in and grab her turtle father. And then she tries to use the spells to turn him back into himself, but first she turns him into Stink, and then Kevin, and then the one-eyed dinosaur dragon monster, and then finally turns it back into Tom. Turns Kevin's hair bright orange when she's trying to fix him. And then Keela comes back, and she's going to set everything right, and she has a conversation with Annie about you need to learn magic, you need to be responsible with magic, etc. It's one of those episodes, and not all of them are, but some of them are, that makes me think that if this had gone on, it would have gotten a lot better. It would have gone in interesting directions. Annie would have become prehistoric dinosaur land witch, and that's a thing that might have been interesting. So, and that is the last episode of Land of the Lost that I had not seen. So glad I finally seen it. But the last episode of the 1990s version of the series was Misery Loves Company. So Tasha has apparently reached the Terrible Twos, which makes sense if this is the end of the second season, if each season represents about a year, that the actors themselves would have aged, meaning the characters would have been perceived age, and end of the second season, end of 2 years. Tasha was born at the beginning of the first season, so it works. I don't know what the shooting schedule was. I don't know what the intended timeline was, but that's what I'm going with for now. Tasha has reached the Terrible Twos, and she is still not teething, but she's become very rambunctious. She destroys that tape, bullets and butterflies. She knocks over the fruit bowl that Annie, who is a painter on top of being a witch, she's painting the still life and starts trying to eat the fruit, and then ruins the painting when Stink or Annie goes away temporarily, I forget why, and then Tasha takes the paintbrush and ruins the painting. Stink, meanwhile, we open the episode with Stink walking kind of sleepily through the woods. Apparently he hasn't gotten enough sleep, and then he kind of sneaks into the treehouse, gets into, I think it's Annie's bed, the one that he usually rolls over on his way in, and just pulls the covers over him, tells Tasha to be quiet, and he's trying to get some sleep. Booty sleep, as he calls it. Annie, meanwhile, she leaves the treehouse. She wants a break from Tasha. She promises to do the dishes for some length of time. I forget how long, but instead of Kevin doing the dishes, so she convinces Kevin to take Tasha off her hands. Kevin's goal for the day is to fix the roof because it's going to rain. Tom has gone off, I guess, to learn to hunt from Krista. Krista's not in this episode or the last one. She's one of the most interesting characters, so it's a shame they underused her. But it's 30 years ago. I'm not complaining. Let's see. So that's the setup. That's the situation. And Kevin eventually sees that Stink is there and says, well, maybe Stink wants to help him up on the roof, because Stink, unlike Tasha, can actually be a help up on the roof. And Tasha would, even if Tasha could help, she'd probably mess something up because that's what she's in the mood for at this time. But Kevin accidentally pulls one of the fronds that he's using to cover the roof out from under Stink, who has kind of fallen asleep because he needs sleep, and Stink rolls off the roof down past the entrance to the treehouse onto the ground. And Kevin gets very worried, but before Stink gets up, he's saying, is anything wrong? And then Stink says he's a good faller, which is a good point, because Steven is not more of a primate, but closer to animal primates that have better use of their arms and legs than humans do, and is closer to where instinct would kick in. So it makes sense that Stink would be a good follower. But then when Kevin says, "Oh, good, we go back to the roof and work some more," Stink decides to feign a foot injury. And Kevin then, of course, says, well, he's feeling guilty, and so he says, of course, carries him up, puts him in bed, wraps his foot, and says, anything you want. And so Stink says, oh, a massage would be nice. And then Kevin gives him a little horn that he can honk whenever he wants Kevin to come back down off the roof and get him something that Tasha cannot get, because Tasha's still making trouble around the treehouse. And you know, if Stink had just gone to sleep, he probably would have gotten his sleep, even with Tasha there. But he decides to overplay his hand, and asks for a lot, and really gets on Kevin's nerves. Tasha figures out that Stink is faking and tries to, but of course Tasha can't speak words, so it just seems like she's being more and more of a pest. And then there's a scene of Kevin standing on the Stegosaurus, and this is where we find out the Stegosaurus' name is Spike, and he's picking some fruit. Oh, he's picking the fruit because Stink asked for the fruit. Yeah, Scarface comes along, fights the Stegosaurus, who wins the fight by toppling Scarface, and Kevin returns to the treehouse, and you know, back to the fray, and he says he spells out, even though it is much clearer than the gun and alcohol episodes previously, the lesson of the episode is much clearer, but he still spells it out. Being a dad isn't easy, which is a message that I think a lot of kids shows incorporate, because one, they're not written by kids, they're written by people who are probably dads or moms or other parents, and it's important that kids know being a dad isn't easy. That somebody tell them that, and what better than the dinosaur TV show. Let's see. Tasha eventually manages to lure Stink out of the treehouse with a candy bar, and Kevin sees that Stink is faking. So they decide to play a practical joke on Stink, where Tasha and Kevin have a fight off-screen outside of the treehouse, and then pretend to fall onto the ground from the porch of the treehouse, and they use that boombox and a recordable cassette tape, which again is another one of those, how many recordable cassette tapes did they bring on this trip? Did they plan to record a lot? Is it just all their cassettes, and then some of them already have music, and then some of them are for recording? And there's also, they have one of those, it's a, I forget what it's called. I don't think it's called a kiln, but it's an oven, it looks like a cone, but then the pipe goes way up for exhaust, and there's a little opening, and they put the food in. That kind of oven, which sure they could have made from clay, and I guess they did, but it seems, I look at it, my first thought was, did they bring that with them too? Because they brought everything. But probably it's more likely they could have made it with clay. We've seen Annie work with clay, so it's maybe excusable, and Tom certainly. But the bigger problem was they recorded it on the cassette, so they had recordable cassettes, and it's a shouting match that they recorded, and so how Stink didn't hear them recording the shouting match that was then repeated on the boombox, that, especially when he's so sensitive to hearing because he's trying to sleep, but, you know, maybe he actually managed to sleep. But then, you know, they do the thing. Stink thinks that they've fallen, and that he's going to have to be their servant, which he becomes their servant anyway as penance for having made them his servant. For some reason, I forget what part this was, but I wrote down that Stink's face is not very expressive. The face is mostly a mask of a kind of ape-like pre-human. So the mouth opens and the eyes open, and the mouth and the eyes, well, the eyes are expressive. The mouth is just mostly open and close, but it's not very expressive. But because of that, I think what the eyes do kind of take over the whole blank face, and so it's pretty funny when Stink has a funny expression. I think it's funnier because the face can't do anything, so it's just the eyes and a little bit the mouth. And then final little details. Annie returns in the rain. It has started to rain very hard. Annie has returned. She's been out sketching. And then Tom returns and he says that Krista will never manage to make him a great hunter. And then he asks Kevin, did you get the roof fully patched? And Kevin says, oh, well, except for this one part, and it happens to be the part, of course, that is directly over where he's sitting, and at that moment it collapses and he gets a lot of rain on him. End of episode, end of series, and not quite end of this video thing that I am doing, because I do plan to watch a couple of episodes, at least 2, of the 70s series, the first 2 episodes, or maybe the first episode of season 1, the first episode of season 2. I don't know exactly that seems like a better sampling sort of thing to do. And also, I was all set to make the excuse that I'd I'd watch the Will Ferrell movie and talk about that too, but it wasn't streaming. And then Saturday was May 1st. The first of the month is new streaming day, and what should pop up but the Land of the Lost movie with Will Ferrell. So I will watch that. I have seen it. I don't think I ever intended to watch it again, but I will watch it again for the purposes of this, along with some of those 70s shows. So, yeah, so that's... But on the other hand, I'm glad to, because it makes it more complete. It's kind of like when we watched all the Showa-era Godzilla movies and the initial King Kong movies, and then at the tail end of the Godzilla movies, we were like, maybe we should watch those the MonsterVerse movies that are available to us, because then we can compare them to the classics, and it will also prepare us for Godzilla vs. Kong, the new version. So if you have a good excuse, watch the thing that you already know that you don't really like for a second time. In the meantime, though, as Krista would say, even though she wasn't in these last 2 episodes, peace and love.